The chamber stretched wider than most human cities, ceiling lost somewhere in the artificial atmosphere that kept hundreds of different species breathing the same air. Daniel Pierce stood at the center of it all, wearing the crisp uniform of Earth Alliance with its blue and silver insignia, catching the light from a dozen different suns streaming through the transparent dome above. Around him sat the representatives of 400 species, arranged in concentric circles that rose like an amphitheater. Each delegate perched, or floating, or standing according to their biology. The Viraxians occupied the highest tier, their crystalline bodies refracting light in patterns that hurt human eyes to watch for too long. Below them sat the Kelthoran Collective, massive beings that looked like someone had crossed a bear with an octopus and given it 6 eyes. The ancient sovereignty floated in their environmental pods, gaseous forms that pulsed with colors humans had no names for. Daniel had stood in this chamber more times than he could count, always presenting Earth's case, always being denied, always hearing the same condescending tones from beings who measured their civilizations in millions of years. While humanity could barely claim 10,000, today would be different. Today he carried the final message from Earth, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the data tablet. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. Lisa Morgan stood beside him. Her role as Earth's chief ambassador, having aged her a decade in just 5 years, her hair had gone from brown to gray at the temples, and lines creased her face that had not been there when she first arrived at Centaurus Prime. She had fought so hard for humanity's voice to be heard, spent countless hours in negotiations, learned 17 alien languages, adapted to foods that made her sick and customs that made no sense. All of it for nothing. The current speaker was a Vracian named Kelthex. Its voice like wind chimes in a hurricane, translated into human speech by the neural implant all delegates wore. It was demanding Earth commit 70% of its fleet to suppress a rebellion in the Outer Rim. Conflict humanity had no stake in, fought over resources Earth would never see. Daniel waited for Kelthex to finish, watched the being's crystalline form shimmer with what might have been satisfaction or might have been indigestion for all humans could tell. When silence finally came, Daniel activated his tablet, and his voice carried across the chamber through amplifiers designed to make even a whisper audible to every species present. He spoke in clear, measured tones, the way his instructors at the academy had taught him. But beneath the professional delivery ran a current of cold anger that had been building for years. Earth acknowledged the Council's request, he began, and several delegates shifted in their seats or pods or perches because usually humans spent an hour building up to their point, trying to soften the blow of whatever concession they were about to make. Earth had reviewed the casualty reports from the Outer Rim conflict, Daniel continued, noting that 83% of all combat deaths were human soldiers, fighting for causes that brought Earth no benefit, protecting species who voted against every human petition for basic representation. The chamber grew quiet in a way it rarely did, a hush falling over hundreds of beings who suddenly sensed something different in the air. Daniel looked up at the Vracians on their high tier, met what he thought might be Kelthex's eyes, though it was hard to tell, with crystalline beings, and spoke the words that Earth had sent him to deliver. Humanity declined the Council's request. Furthermore, effective immediately, Earth withdrew from the Galactic Council and all associated treaties, agreements, and obligations. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds before the chamber erupted. Delegates were shouting in languages the translators struggled to keep up with, creating a cacophony that would have been deafening if the acoustic dampeners had not kicked in. Daniel stood perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold around him. Like a man watching a storm from behind thick glass, Kelthex's voice cut through the noise, amplified to override all others, demanding to know if Earth understood what it was doing, if humans comprehended the consequences of such a reckless decision. The Kelthoran representative, a being named Zexther, who held the title of Supreme Chancellor, activated his own amplification, and his voice boomed across the chamber like thunder, telling Daniel that Earth was making a grave mistake, that humanity would not survive a year without Council protection, without access to the Jumpgate network, without the trade agreements that kept Earth's colonies supplied, Lisa stepped forward then. And perhaps it should have been her delivering this message all along, because her voice carried none of Daniel's restraint. She told them exactly what Earth thought of their protection, reminded them how many human ships had been destroyed defending Council worlds while those same worlds voted against giving humans a voice in how those battles were planned. She listed every petition Earth had made for full membership, every request denied, every condescending response that treated humanity like children who needed to earn their place at the adult table, the delegates from smaller species, those who had even less voice than humanity, watched with wide eyes or sensor stalks or whatever organs they used for seeing. Some of them had tried to ally with Earth before, hoping that together the younger species might gain more influence. But the elder races always shut down such cooperation. Keeping everyone in their place, Daniel raised his hand, and the gesture was so simple, so human, that it somehow commanded attention. He told them Earth's ships would begin withdrawing from Council space within the hour, that all human personnel would be evacuated from joint facilities within the week, that Earth's colonies would cease all cooperation with Council operations immediately. Any Council ships in human territory would be asked politely to leave, and if they refused, they would be escorted out. Laughter started then, beginning with Kelthex and spreading through the upper tiers where the elder races sat. They laughed like adults watching a toddler throw a tantrum, secure in their power, certain that humanity would come crawling back within months when Earth's economy collapsed and its colonies starved. The Varaxians found it particularly amusing, their crystalline forms chiming with what their species considered mirth. Daniel and Lisa turned and walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the vast chamber, even over the laughter. No dramatic speeches, no final warnings, just two humans leaving a room full of beings who thought they knew everything. The doors sealed behind them with a hiss of pressurizing atmosphere, cutting off the sound of mockery. Outside in the corridor, Daniel finally let out the breath he had been holding. Lisa looked at him with eyes that held both relief and terror, because they had just done something unprecedented in galactic history. No species had ever voluntarily left the Council. Not in the 8 million years since its founding. Their shuttle waited in the docking bay, and within minutes they were accelerating away from Centaurus Prime. Through the viewport, Daniel could see other human ships doing the same, dozens of them breaking orbit and heading for the jump points that would take them home. Earth's largest carrier, the Washington, hung in space nearby, its launch bays opening to receive the smaller vessels. The communications officer on their shuttle turned in her. Seaton reported that Earth Command had received their signal, that the withdrawal was proceeding according to plan across all Council space, that every human was coming home. Lisa closed her eyes, and Daniel wondered if she was praying or just trying to imagine what came next. Behind them, Centaurus Prime grew smaller in the viewport, its lights twinkling like false stars. Ahead lay Earth and uncertainty in the enormous task of proving that humanity could survive alone. The galaxy thought humans were making a suicidal mistake. In 1 year, maybe less, they expected Earth to come begging for readmission, willing to accept any terms to survive. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 6 months had passed since the last human ship left. Council Space and Jake Sullivan stood on the observation deck of New Horizon, watching supply shuttles dock with practiced efficiency. The colony had been built 20 years ago as a joint human council venture. But now it belonged entirely to Earth and its people, no longer sharing resources or decisions with alien oversight. Jake had commanded the defense forces here for 3 years, and he remembered clearly the day the council liaison had packed up and left, muttering about how humans would regret their arrogance. That liaison was probably sitting in some comfortable office on Centaurus Prime right now, waiting for news of Earth's collapse. The news had not come because Earth was not collapsing. Jake watched another transport arrive carrying manufactured goods from the lunar factories. Their production increased by 40% since they no longer had to meet council quotas or follow council regulations about what could be built. Carolyn Webb had explained it to him last week over coffee. How the restrictions the council imposed had been slowly strangling human innovation for decades, forcing Earth's scientists to develop technology Along approved lines, while their own ideas went unexplored, Caroline ran the research. Division now, and Jake had never seen her so energized. She barely slept anymore, working 18-hour days in the labs with her team, developing G-systems that the Council had forbidden or discouraged. Yesterday, she had shown him a prototype shield generator that worked on principles the Keltherin had declared too dangerous to research, but Caroline's tests showed it was perfectly stable and 3 times more effective than Council standard designs. Down in the colony's main hub, families went about their daily lives in corridors that used to feel cramped when Council inspectors and their equipment took up half the space. Children attended schools where teachers no longer had to include mandatory Council history lessons that portrayed humanity as lucky newcomers who should be grateful for the elder race's wisdom. The hydroponics gardens produced food without having to ship 30% of the yield to Council agricultural assessment centers, which meant people ate better and the surplus went into storage against hard times that had not arrived. Earth's economy had not collapsed. The predictions of starvation and chaos had proven false, made by beings who did not understand that humans had spent their entire history surviving against impossible odds, adapting to problems that would have destroyed species who relied on ancient, established systems. Jake's communicator chimed, and he answered to hear his second-in-command reporting a ship on approach. Not human, requesting permission to dock. He made his way to the command center where the sensor operators were tracking a small vessel, its design marking it as Talron, one of the minor species from the galactic rim. The Talron had always been friendly to humans, often working alongside Earth's crews in the mining operations before the withdrawal. The ship transmitted a standard docking request and Jake granted it, curious about what would bring a Talron vessel to human space. An hour later, he met their representative in one of the small conference rooms near the docking bay. The Talron's name was Vexel, and he looked bad. His usually bright blue skin tone faded to gray. His movements carrying a weight that spoke of exhaustion and fear, Vexel told his story in halting English, explaining that, since humanity left, the protection that human patrols had provided in the rim sectors was gone. Pirates had grown bold, raiding Talron settlements with impunity. The Council had promised to send their own patrol ships, but none had come. And when Vexel's, people petitioned for help. They were told that resources were stretched thin, that they would have to wait their turn, that surely a few pirate raids were manageable. 3. Talron colonies had been hit in the last month, and Vexel showed Jake the casualty reports. Numbers that would have been prevented if human ships had still been running their regular patrols through that sector. The Talron were not warriors. Their species had joined the Council specifically because it promised protection. And now that protection had proven to be an illusion maintained only by species the Council took for granted. Vexel asked for Earth's help, offered to pay whatever price humanity demanded, said his people would pledge loyalty to Earth if that was what it took. Jake listened to all of it and felt something twist in his chest because he remembered patrolling those sectors. Remembered sharing meals with Talron miners, teaching their kids how to play baseball during downtime on the asteroid stations. He told Vexel no, as gently as he could. Earth had made its choice, and the Council had made theirs. And humanity would not go back to being the galaxy's unpaid security force. If the Talron wanted Earth's protection, they would have to leave Council space entirely, relocate to human territory. Except that such a move would mean burning bridges with the Council permanently. Vexel sat silent for a long moment, and Jake could see him processing the implications, weighing the options his people faced. Finally, the Talron stood and thanked Jake for his honesty, said he would take the message back to his people's leadership, and left looking even more defeated than when he arrived. Jake watched the Talron ship depart and wondered how many more would come. How many species were suffering now that humans were gone? How long before the Council's carefully maintained image of strength and stability cracked wide enough for everyone to see the truth underneath? That evening he met Caroline for dinner in the colony's main cafeteria, a space that used to be divided into human and alien sections, but now was just one open area where people gathered. She was excited about a breakthrough in faster-than-light engine design. explaining with her hands how they had figured out a way to bypass the Council's jump gate network entirely, create their own gates that only human ships could use. The implications were staggering, and Jake understood enough to know this meant Earth would never need the Council's infrastructure again, could establish its own trade routes, connect its colonies without relying on ancient alien technology that came with oversight and control. Carolyn said the first test was scheduled for next month, and if it worked, humanity would have true independence in a way they had never possessed before. Reports came in from other human colonies telling similar stories of progress and adaptation. The Mars Research Station had cracked the problem of long-term habitation in low gravity without Council medical supplements. The Europa mining operation had discovered new extraction techniques that tripled their output. Earth's orbital shipyards were producing vessels designed from scratch for human needs rather than modified alien templates. Meanwhile, across Council space, different reports circulated. The Vraxian military logistics network had crashed twice in the last month because the human programmers who maintained it were gone. Keltheron mining operations were running at 60% capacity because humans had been the ones who optimized the processes, and without them, efficiency plummeted. Trade routes were taking longer because human navigators had found the shortest paths through hazardous space. And now ships had to use the old, slower routes. Small species like the Talaran suffered most. The ones who had relied on humanity's protection and assistance, who now found themselves abandoned by a council that had never really cared about them. Some were quietly sending messages to human space, asking about the possibility of relocation. Willing to risk the Council's anger for a chance at survival, Jake received 3 more requests for help in the following weeks and turned them all away. Hating it, but knowing that Earth had to hold firm, humanity was building something new, something better, and they could not afford to slip back into old patterns of giving everything while receiving nothing in return. Caroline's test succeeded, and the first human-built jump gate activated in empty space beyond Pluto. Stable and functional and completely independent of Council control. The news spread through human space like wildfire. Celebrations breaking out on every colony and station. People understanding that they had truly done it. That Earth had cut the last chain binding them to a system that never valued them. On Centaurus Prime, the Council held emergency sessions trying to understand why their systems were failing, why their economy was stuttering, why minor species were growing restless. Some among the elder races were beginning to suspect that perhaps humanity's contribution had been larger than they assumed. But pride prevented them from admitting it aloud. The galaxy watched and waited to see which side would break first. Whether Earth would come crawling back or whether the Council would bend, but both sides held firm, and the silence between them deepened with each passing day. In that silence, humanity grew stronger, while the Council grew weaker. And the balance of power shifted in ways neither side fully understood yet. Jake stood on his observation deck and watched the stars, wondering what would come next, knowing that whatever it was, humanity would face it on their own terms. The warning came from the edge of known space, where ancient sensors had sat dormant for millennia. Placed there by civilizations so old their names were forgotten. Gregory Hayes was reviewing supply reports when the alert flashed across every screen in the command center. A priority signal that overrode everything else. He had been an admiral in the Council fleet before Earth's withdrawal and now commanded the defense coordination for all human colonies. A job that had seemed almost boring for the past year until this moment. The sensors detected something massive, moving through dark space, a region between galaxies where nothing should exist. The readings made no sense at first, showing energy signatures that matched nothing in any database, human or Council. Gregory ordered every telescope and scanner in human space, pointed at those coordinates, and what they found made his blood run cold. The Krillix swarm had awakened. Every spacefaring species knew the stories. Legends passed down through millions of years about the devourers who came from the void between stars, consuming everything in their path before returning to hibernation. Most dismissed the tales as mythology, warnings invented by ancient races to scare their children, but the sensor data showed the truth. Thousands of ships, if they could be called ships, more like living organisms the size of moons. Moving toward Council space with inexorable purpose, Gregory immediately sent the data to Earth, Command, and to every human colony, initiating defense protocols that had been developed during the months of isolation. Then, because he was not a man who believed in letting people die even if they had wronged him, he transmitted the same data to Centaurus Prime on an open channel that anyone could intercept. The Council received Earth's warning, and for the first time in recorded history, the elder races felt genuine fear. Supreme Chancellor Zexther convened an emergency session and ordered every available fleet to the galactic rim where the Krillix were expected to breach into normal space. The Varaxians committed their crystalline warships, vessels that had conquered 100 systems. The Keltheron deployed their dreadnoughts, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. The ancient sovereignty brought their reality-warping weapons, technology so advanced it seemed like magic. The first battle lasted 3 hours and the Council lost. Their ships engaged the Krillix, using tactics developed over millions of years. Formations and strategies that had won countless wars, and none of it mattered. The Krillix did not fight like any enemy the Council had faced. They did not follow patterns or respond to feints or fall for traps. They simply swarmed. Overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers and alien biology that adapted to every weapon used against them. Gregory watched the battle reports come in. Through the intelligence network that humanity had maintained despite leaving the Council. 70% of the Varaxian fleet destroyed in the opening engagement. Keltheron dreadnoughts disabled or consumed. The ancient sovereignty's reality weapons proved effective, but they had too few ships. Too little firepower to stop the tide. Caroline Webb burst into the command center without knocking, her tablet clutched in both hands and her eyes wide with urgency. She had been analyzing the Krillix biology from the sensor. Scans and discovered something the Council had apparently forgotten or never known. The creatures were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies, wavelengths that human ships already used for their new shield generators. The same technology the Council had forbidden as too dangerous. The irony was not lost on Gregory. Humanity's weapons developed in isolation without Council restrictions were specifically suited to fight an enemy the Council could not defeat. He ordered immediate testing, and Caroline's team confirmed it within hours. Human shields disrupted Krillix biological functions. Human weapons operating on those frequencies caused catastrophic damage to their organic hulls. Earth's command called an emergency meeting, and Gregory attended via hologram from his station. The room was full of admirals, generals, scientists, and politicians, all arguing about what humanity should do. Some wanted to help immediately, said that letting billions die was unconscionable regardless of past grievances. Others argued that the Council had made its choice, that Earth owed them nothing, that humanity should focus on defending its own territory. President Manuela Torres listened to both sides and then asked the question that cut through all the rhetoric. What kind of civilization did humanity want to be? One that stood by while genocide unfolded, or one that acted to save lives even when it was not politically convenient? The decision was made, but not the one the Council expected. Earth would intervene to protect civilian populations and any species willing to abandon the Council's structure, willing to join a new alliance based on equality rather than hierarchy. Humanity would not save the elder races who had kept everyone else under their control for eons, would not restore the old order, would instead offer an alternative to any who wanted it. Gregory began coordinating with his fleet commanders, pulling together every combat-ready ship humanity possessed. The fleet that assembled beyond Earth's orbit was unlike anything the galaxy had seen from humans before. Sleek vessels built with technology developed during isolation, powered by engines that did not need Council jump gates, armed with weapons designed by minds freed from alien oversight. Meanwhile, the Krillix continued their advance, system after system falling to their hunger. Refugee ships fled in all directions, carrying survivors from destroyed worlds, and many of them headed toward human space because word had spread that Earth's borders remained secure, that human colonies were not being overrun. Jake Sullivan on New Horizon found himself coordinating refugee reception. Turning his military station into a humanitarian center almost overnight, the Talron arrived first, Vexel among them, bringing his entire extended family and thousands of others who had taken the gamble that humans would accept them. Jake put them to work helping process the waves of refugees that followed, species from across Council space seeking safety. The debates on Centaurus Prime grew desperate as the Krillix consumed more territory. Supreme Chancellor Zexter refused to acknowledge the depth of their failure publicly, but privately. Secure channels transmitted increasingly frantic messages toward human space. They received automated responses stating that Earth was willing to discuss terms, but only for refugee evacuation and species relocation, not for saving the Council itself. Zexa finally broke. A transmission reached Earth Command, broadcasted across every human channel. The Supreme Chancellor's voice stripped of its usual arrogance and filled instead with raw desperation. He begged for help, offered humanity full Council membership, territorial concessions, access to ancient technologies, reparations for past treatment. His voice cracked as he described worlds burning, billions dying, civilizations that had existed for millions of years being erased in days. President Torres received the message in her office on Earth, watching the proud Kelthoran reduced to pleading, and felt no satisfaction in it. She ordered the transmission played for the entire human assembly. Let them hear the fear and desperation. Let them understand the weight of the decision they had already made. Gregory received his orders within the hour. Take the fleet to Council space, but not to restore the old order. Not to save the structures that had oppressed so many for so long. Save the people. Offer them a new way. And if the elder races would not bend, then let them face the consequences of their rigidity. The human fleet departed, Earth with Admiral Daniel Pierce in overall command. The man who had delivered humanity's withdrawal now leading its return on humanity's terms. The ships moved faster than Council vessels could track, jumping through human-made gates that bypassed the entire network, the Elder. Races controlled. News of the fleet's movement spread across the galaxy at light speed. Some species celebrated, seeing hope for the first time in weeks. Others feared what it meant. Understanding that humanity was not coming as a savior, but as a power that would reshape everything. The first engagement between human forces and the Krillix occurred at the Hesper system, where a refugee convoy was, pinned down by a Krillix hunting pack. Daniel's ships arrived in a formation no Council admiral would recognize, moving in patterns that seemed chaotic, but were actually precisely calculated. Human shields flared to life, and the Krillix recoiled from the frequencies, their biological systems disrupted. Human weapons fired, and Krillix ships died. Their organic hulls, rupturing under assault, they had no defense against. The battle lasted 40 minutes, and when it ended, 3 Krillix vessels were destroyed, and the refugee convoy was safe. Daniel ordered his ships to escort the civilians to human territory, and then turned his fleet toward the next crisis. Leaving behind a system full of beings who could not quite believe what they had witnessed, the galaxy trembled again. But this time not from humanity's absence, but from their presence. And the balance of power shifted in ways that would change everything forever. The Krillix reached Centaurus Prime on a Tuesday morning. Galactic Standard Time, and the defense fleet that the Council had scraped together was simply not enough. Daniel Pierce watched from the bridge of his flagship as the massive organic ships surrounded the station that had been the center of galactic civilization for 8 million years. And he knew that what happened in the next few hours would determine the future of every species in known space. The Council's remaining forces fought with the desperation of beings who had everything to lose, their weapons firing in patterns that had won 1,000 wars, but the Krillix absorbed the damage and kept coming. Crystalline Varaxian ships shattered against living hulls that reformed faster than they could be destroyed. Kelthoran dreadnoughts fired their planet-cracking weapons only to watch the Krillix split into smaller forms that swarmed around the blasts. Supreme Chancellor Zexter transmitted one final message before the communications array on Centaurus Prime went dark, his voice carrying across every frequency that still functioned. He asked humanity to remember that, despite everything, Despite the mistakes and the arrogance and the centuries of mistreatment, there were billions of innocent civilians on the station who had never voted to oppress anyone. Children who had never known anything but the Council's protection. Families who were about to die for the sins of their leaders. Daniel gave the order, and the human fleet accelerated into the battle zone with every ship pushing their engines beyond recommended limits. Caroline Webb had equipped each vessel with the new shield generators tuned to the exact frequencies that disrupted. And as the human ships entered weapons range, those shields lit up the darkness, like stars being born. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Krillix vessels that had shrugged off Council weapons recoiled from human shields, their organic systems going haywire when exposed to the electromagnetic frequencies. Daniel's tactical officers had studied every piece of data from previous engagements and developed pet attack patterns specifically designed to exploit Krillix weaknesses. Formations that kept the enemy off balance while maximizing the effect of human weapons. The flagship's main cannon fired, and a Krillix ship the size of a small moon split down the middle, its biological core exposed to vacuum and dying in seconds. All around the battlefield, human vessels were carving through the swarm with an efficiency that shocked everyone watching. Council ships that had been on the verge of being overwhelmed suddenly had breathing room as the Krillix turned to face this new threat. Gregory Hayes coordinated the fleet movements from his command center. His decades of experience with Council tactics now combined with the innovations humanity had developed in isolation, he saw patterns in the Krillix behavior that Council admirals had missed. Recognized that the creatures were not mindless, but operated under a collective intelligence that could be confused by the right stimuli, he ordered random frequency shifts in the human shields, changing the wavelengths every few seconds so the Krillix could not adapt, and the tactic worked. The swarm began to fragment, individual ships breaking formation as their collective coordination failed. Human strike groups exploited the gaps, hitting hard and fast before retreating behind shield walls that the Krillix could not penetrate. On Centaurus Prime, evacuation was chaos. Millions of beings trying to reach escape pods and shuttles. The station's infrastructure failing as Krillix bioweapons ate through the hull in a dozen places. Daniel diverted a quarter of his fleet to cover the evacuation. Human ships forming a protective barrier around the fleeing civilians, while the rest of the fleet kept the Krillix occupied. Lisa Morgan was down there somewhere. Having returned to the Council on a diplomatic mission just days before the attack, Daniel tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the battle. But part of his mind kept tracking the evacuation reports, looking for her name among the survivors being pulled off the dying station. The main Krillix hive ship emerged from the swarm, a monstrosity 3 times larger than anything they had fielded so far. Its surface covered in weapons that had evolved specifically to kill starships. It targeted Daniel's flagship and fired biological projectiles that moved faster than missiles and hit harder than antimatter warheads. Human shields held but barely, the entire ship shaking from impacts that would have vaporized any Council vessel. Daniel ordered all power to forward shields and returned fire with everything the flagship carried, pouring enough energy into that one target to level a continent. The hive ship's hull cracked, split, began to come apart. But it kept firing even as it died, launching smaller Krillix forms that swarmed toward the human fleet like angry hornets. Caroline's voice came through on the command channel from her lab ship at the edge of the battle. Excited and terrified at the same time, she had discovered something in the data from the hive ship, a central node that coordinated the entire swarm, and if they could destroy it, the collective intelligence would collapse and the remaining Krillix would become little more than animals. The problem was that the node was biological. Hidden somewhere inside the hive ship's massive bulk, protected by layers of organic armor that regenerated faster than they could destroy it. They needed something that could penetrate deep into the ship's core and detonate with enough force to obliterate the node completely. Daniel made a decision that he knew he might regret for the rest of his life. He ordered the flagship to ram the hive ship, to drive straight into its core while every weapon fired at maximum power, essentially turning the entire vessel into a massive kinetic weapon. The crew had 30 seconds to reach escape pods, and Daniel counted down the seconds. While running for the pod bay himself, The impact was like a small sun being born. The flagship's shields carved through the hive ship's hull, its engines driving the wreckage deeper and deeper until they reached the central node and detonated. The explosion consumed both ships, expanding outward in a sphere of superheated plasma that vaporized everything within a kilometer radius. Daniel's escape pod tumbled through space, its shields barely holding against the shockwave. And he watched through the viewport as the Krillix swarm simply stopped. The smaller ships drifted without purpose, their collective intelligence severed, no longer coordinating their attacks. Human and council ships moved in quickly, destroying the confused Krillix vessels before they could reorganize. The battle for Centaurus Prime was over. The station was heavily damaged, huge sections open to space, but it had survived, and so had most of its population. Rescue ships moved through the debris field, picking up survivors from destroyed vessels, human and alien alike. Daniel's pod was retrieved by a Kelthoran cruiser whose captain seemed unable to process what had just happened, kept asking if the humans had really just saved Centaurus Prime when they could have let it fall. Lisa found Daniel in the medical bay where they were treating him for radiation exposure and minor injuries. She looked exhausted, her clothes torn and dirty from helping with the evacuation. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. She told him that she had watched the flagship's final charge from an observation deck on the station, had seen him sacrifice the most powerful ship in the human fleet to save billions of beings who had spent years treating Earth like a useful tool, rather than an equal partner. The casualty reports came in slowly over the next hours. Humanity had lost 40 ships and nearly 10,000 crew members, the highest losses Earth had suffered in any single engagement in its history. The Council had lost hundreds of ships and millions of civilians despite the evacuation efforts. The Krillix losses were incalculable, the swarm broken and scattered across a dozen systems. Supreme Chancellor Zexther requested a meeting with Earth's leadership, and President Torres agreed. But the meeting would happen on human terms. At New Horizon rather than Centaurus Prime, the power dynamic had shifted in a way that could never be reversed, and everyone knew it. Daniel stood in the observation lounge of the rescue ship, watching Centaurus Prime slowly rotate against the stars, and wondered what would rise from the ashes of the old order. Humanity had proven it could stand alone, had shown that the elder races were not invincible, had demonstrated that 8 million years of history did not guarantee wisdom or strength. The galaxy would never be the same. And Daniel suspected that was exactly what it needed. Even if the path to that new future was paved with sacrifice and loss, the Krillix were not defeated, only driven back, and there would be more battles to come. But for now, there was a moment to breathe, to mourn the dead, and to prepare for whatever came next. The war against the Krillix lasted another 4 months, and humanity led every major battle. Daniel Pierce commanded the combined fleet from a new flagship, coordinating attacks across a dozen star systems, while Gregory Hayes managed logistics in Caroline. Webb continued developing weapons that pushed the boundaries of what anyone thought possible. The Krillix adapted to human tactics, but humans adapted faster, thinking in ways that millions of years of council tradition had never considered, taking risks that elder races deemed too dangerous and turning those risks into victories. Jake Sullivan left New Horizon to lead ground forces when the Krillix established hive colonies on 3 contested worlds. The fighting was brutal. It's close-quarters combat in environments that shifted and changed as the Krillix reshaped the landscape to suit their biology. Human soldiers fought alongside volunteers from 24 species, all of them united by necessity rather than treaties. And Jake discovered that when people fought for survival instead of council mandates, they fought harder and trusted each other more. The final battle came at the Krillix primary hive cluster, a collection of massive organic structures floating in the void between spiral arms where no star had ever formed. Intelligence suggested this was where the species returned to hibernate, where their queens bred and their collective consciousness originated. Destroying it would not eliminate the Krillix entirely, but would cripple them for generations, perhaps centuries. Daniel assembled the largest fleet humanity had ever fielded. Nearly 200 warships backed by another 300 vessels from species who had abandoned the Council to join Earth's coalition. The Vraxians were notably absent, their pride preventing them from serving under human command. The Keltherans sent only a token force, still clinging to the belief that their ancient power meant something. But the younger species came in force. The Talron and dozens of others who had suffered under Council neglect and now saw a chance for something better. The approach to the hive cluster took 3 days at maximum speed, traveling through space so empty that stars were just distant points of light in every direction. Carolyn worked without sleep on the weapon that would crack the hive's core, a resonance bomb that would exploit the Krillek's biological tendency toward collective consciousness, turning their greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Jake and his ground troops trained in the cargo bays, preparing for the assault that would plant Caroline's bomb deep in the hive structure. They knew the casualty estimates, understood that many of them would not return. But nobody suggested calling it off or finding another way. Sometimes the only path forward was through the fur. And humanity had never been afraid of getting burned. The Krilleks were waiting when the fleet emerged from their final jump. Thousands of bioships arranged in defensive formations around the hive cluster. Daniel gave the order to attack, and the battle began with a fury that made previous engagements look like skirmishes. Space filled with weapons, fire, and exploding ships. Human shields glowing bright against the darkness as they repelled Krilleks. Bioweapons. Jake's assault ships punched through the Krilleks' lines, their armor scarred and blackened, but holding together, and made landing approach on the largest hive structure. The landing was rough, enemy fire rocking the ships even as they touched down on the organic surface that pulsed like living flesh beneath their feet. Jake led the first squad out, weapons ready, and immediately found themselves in a nightmare landscape of shifting corridors and walls that grew teeth. The fighting was worse than anything they had trained for. Krillek's warriors emerging from the walls themselves, adapted specifically for close combat, with mandibles that could tear through armor and acid that burned through anything it touched. Jake's people fought room by room, meter by meter, paying in blood for every step toward the hive's core. Above them, Daniel's fleet was being ground down by sheer numbers. Human ships were faster and more efficient, but the Krilleks had thousands of vessels and they kept coming, accepting losses that would have broken any other species. Daniel rerouted power, shifted formations, ordered kamikaze runs when necessary, doing everything he could to buy Jake's team the time they needed. Caroline monitored the ground team's progress from her lab ship, watching their transponder signals move deeper into the hive structure, watching some of those signals wink out as people died. She had built the bomb herself, triple-checked every calculation, but doubt crept in anyway, because if it failed, if her math was wrong, or her understanding of Krillek's biology incomplete, then everyone down there would die for nothing. Jake reached the core chamber after 2 hours of continuous fighting. His team reduced from 50 to 17, all of them wounded, running on stimulants and determination. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of organic architecture, with a central node pulsing at its heart, a mass of biological computing power that coordinated the entire Krillek's presence in this region of space. He set the bomb personally, Caroline's voice in his ear walking him through the activation sequence. The retreat was a running battle back through corridors that the Krilleks had sealed behind them. Walls closing in and floors dropping away as the hive realized what was happening. Jake lost more people, watched friends and allies die covering each other's escape. And by the time they reached the landing ships, only 9 remained from the original 50. The ships launched with Krillek's warriors clinging to their hulls, firing through opening bay doors, engines screaming as they clawed for altitude. Daniel ordered every ship in the fleet to pull back, to get clear of the blast radius, and the human vessels began their retreat. While still firing to cover each other, Caroline's bomb detonated exactly on schedule, the resonance wave propagating through the hive's organic structure at the speed of thought. The effect was instantaneous and total. The collective consciousness that had coordinated billions of Krilleks across light years simply ceasing to exist. The hive structures began to collapse, massive organic forms breaking apart as the biology that held them together failed. Every Krillex ship in the system stopped functioning at once, their crews dead or reduced to mindless animals. And the human fleet moved through the debris field, destroying what remained. The battle was over, and humanity had won at a cost of 70 ships and 20,000 lives. Losses that would be mourned, but that had purchased something invaluable: the return to civilized. Space took a week, and when Daniel's fleet arrived at New Horizon, they found it transformed into something between a military base and a meeting hall. Species from across the galaxy had gathered, representatives from hundreds of worlds, all of them waiting to see what humanity would do with the power it had claimed. President Torres arrived from Earth and Supreme. Chancellor Zexler came from what remained of Centaurus Prime. And they met in a conference room that Jake had cleared of everything except a simple table and chairs. No grand amphitheater with tiered seating, no environmental controls for hundreds of different biologies. Just a room where equals could talk. The negotiations lasted 3 days, and the result was a document that Lisa Morgan helped draft. A charter for what they called the Free Systems Alliance. Every species had equal voice, regardless of age or military power or technological advancement. Decisions were made by consensus when possible, by majority vote when necessary. And no species could be compelled to contribute resources or personnel for causes they did not support. The Viraxians rejected the charter immediately, calling it naive and unworkable. The Keltheran initially refused as well, though Zexer himself signed on behalf of his own colony group, effectively splitting his species. The ancient sovereignty withdrew entirely, taking their technology and their ships to isolated space, where they could maintain their purity, but the younger species signed in droves. Dozens, and then hundreds of them, seeing a chance to escape the hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization for eons. The Talrun were first, Vexel standing proudly beside Jake, as they formalized an alliance that had been forged in shared struggle. Others followed, building something new from the ashes of the old order. Daniel stood in the observation deck of New Horizons 6 months later, watching construction crews from a dozen species working together to expand the station. Down in the markets, human children played with Talron younglings, teaching each other games and languages. In the labs, Caroline worked alongside alien scientists who shared ideas freely without worrying about council oversight or ancient protocols. Lisa found him there, as she often did. Both of them older and more scarred than they had been when they walked out of the council chamber more than 2 years ago. She asked if he thought they had done the right thing, if all the death and destruction had been worth it to break a system that had survived for millions of years. Daniel thought about the people who had died, about the ships lost and the sacrifices made, and then he looked out at the station where species worked together as equals, where nobody was told they were too young or too primitive to have a voice. He thought about Jake leading mixed species patrols where humans and aliens trusted each other with their lives, about Caroline's lab, where innovation happened without restriction, about children growing up in a galaxy where their worth was not determined by how many million years their civilization had existed. He told Lisa that the old order had survived for millions of years, not because it was good, but because nobody had ever successfully challenged it. And perhaps that was the real tragedy. How many species had suffered in silence? How many innovations had been suppressed? How many voices had gone unheard because the elder races believed their age granted them wisdom? The universe had trembled when humans abandoned the council, trembled again when they returned on their own terms. And now it was learning to stand on new foundations. Not perfect ones, not without problems or challenges, but foundations built on the idea that respect was earned through actions rather than claimed. Through ancient birthright, humanity had not set out to reshape the galaxy, had only wanted to be treated as equals. But sometimes the simple act of refusing to accept injustice was enough to change everything. The stars still shone the same. The laws of physics had not altered. But the civilizations that moved between those stars would never be the same again. And perhaps that was exactly what the universe had needed all along.